Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Beitzah Daf Yud Tes begins with a discussion of Tvila of a Kli in the mikvah Bein Hashmashos, first of Yom Tov and then of any weekday. Can you do Tvila in the twilight hours of the day? The Gemara will bring a Machlokes Tanaim. The Gemara will explain what the Machlokes Tanaim is. Then we'll get to our next Mishnah. The next Mishnah will introduce the topic of shachting karbonos, slaughtering animals for karbonos on Yom Tov, which karbonos are permitted, and whether or not you're allowed to do smicha, and what types of karbonos are we exactly referring to will be the discussion that takes us through the rest of the daf. So first of all, the Gemara quotes a Beitzah. The Beitzah says if you have a kli which became tummy before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do tefillah bein hashmashos. Bein hashmashos meaning between sunset and nightfall on Erev Yom Tov, on Yom Tov evening. And the reason is because once it's bein hashmashos, it is possibly considered to be Yom Tov already, and you're not allowed to do tefillah on Yom Tov, as we've seen in the previous few daf. You don't do tefillah on Yom Tov of a kli which became tamei already before Yom Tov, that you could have done tefillah before Yom Tov. So that's the Tanna Kama's opinion, and Rosh Shazuri says this is all true, but it's even more. You cannot do Tevila of a Kli during twilight hours ever, even on a regular weekday, even on a regular Tuesday evening going into Wednesday. You cannot do Tevila during twilight, and the reason is because if a person's running to do Tevila during twilight hours, he obviously plans on using this Kli right away. And the rule is that a Kli only becomes tahar after it's put in the mikvah and the sun goes down. This is already after sunset. If it's twilight, it's after sunset. That means that this kli will not be usable until the following sunset. And this person obviously thinks he's going to be able to use it right away. Therefore, you have to stop him and tell him you can't do that tefillah. You're not going to be able to use it. This is not an acceptable way to do tefillah. So the Gemara says, well, why did Tanna Kama not bothered by that? Why is he not concerned with people using the kli right away without waiting for sundown the next day? So the Gemara makes two explanations. Rava quotes the explanation of the Rabbanon de Beirav. They say that the machlokes is about somebody who's running to do tevila during twilight hours. According to the Tanna Kama, if he's running, he obviously knows that he has to make it before sundown. And when he gets there, he'll look up, he'll see the sun's already set, he'll know that he missed sundown, and therefore he has to leave the kli. He cannot use it, he cannot consider it to be tahar until the next sundown. If you don't have to tell him anything. When you're Shazuri, the fact that he's running is because he wants to use it right away. He's in a rush to get his kli to be used. And he does not know about the sundown halacha, and therefore you must stop him and tell him. That was their explanation. Rava says his own explanation is that the person came and he was asking, this kli became tamei with less than an adasha, less than a lentil-sized piece of tumah, less than a lentil-sized afatuma was the time of this kli. And he wants to know, is that one time of the kli or not? And he does not know that halacha. So if he doesn't know that halacha, then according to the Tanna Kama, he still is likely to know the halacha of having to wait for sundown, and you don't have to stop him. Just because he doesn't know that halacha doesn't mean he doesn't know this halacha. The halacha of adasha is not written explicitly in the Torah, while the halacha of waiting for the sun to go down is. According to Shazuri, though, if he doesn't know one halacha, he probably doesn't know the other halacha, and therefore you got to stop him. Okay, now the Gemara explains the next line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that you're allowed to do tefillah of a kli migav legav and michabur lechabur. The Gemara says that means as follows: somebody wants to change his purpose for that he had in mind when he did tefillah on the kli. So he had a kli and he wanted to use it to press olives, and now he did tefillah in order to use it to press olives, and now he wants to use it to press grapes. So he does not have to do another tefillah at all. If he wants to be a machmer, do another tefillah, he's allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Same thing as if somebody did tefillah in order to be part of a carbon Pesach chabura, does not have to, and then he switched to a different chabura, does not have to do tefillah again. If he wants to be machmer on himself, then he can, and he's allowed to do that tefillah even on Yom Tov. Okay, next. The Gemara now introduces our next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses karbanos to be brought on Yom Tov. Now, to bring a carbon on Yom Tov should really only be a carbon that you're allowed to use or eat, or that you're chayev to bring. And the Gemara brings here the Mishnah has a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which includes two machlokes. Machlokes number one: what type of carbon are you allowed to bring? Beis Shammai says you're only allowed to bring a carbon shlomim, not a carbon ola. Shlomim has parts that can be eaten, ola does not. And the carbon shlomim that you're allowed to bring, Beis Shammai says you do not do smicha. You do not lean your weight on the animal. There is a halacha, most karbanas, certainly shlamim and olos require leaning, require smicha, but on Yom Tov you're not allowed to ride on an animal. Leaning your weight on an animal would be like riding on him, and therefore it is forbidden to do smicha midrabanan on Yom Tov. So you don't do smicha on Yom Tov. So again, so Beis Shammai says only shlamim and no smicha. Beis Hillel says you can bring a shlamim or an ola, and you do smicha. Now the Gemara wants to get into, when we talk about shlamim, what type of shlamim? When we talk about ola, what type of ola? So we focus first on the bringing of the karbanos themselves. We'll leave smicha for a later discussion. Which karbanos are you allowed to bring? So we had seen that the Mishnah says machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai if you're allowed to bring a carbon ola. So the Gemara notes that there are two factors. First of all, is it a carbon which is meant to be brought on Yom Tov? It is a Yom Tov carbon. There's a shlamim that is a shlamim of Yom Tov, a shalmei chagiga, shalmei simcha. Then there's a regular shlamim which has nothing to do with Yom Tov. Those are called nedarmin nedavos. Now, karbanos ola also have a Yom Tov carbon ola suriyah. You have to bring a carbon ola when you come to the Beis HaMikdash for ola regal. Then there's also a olas nedava. You could have a ola which is a regular optional donation which you decided to bring that does not have to be brought on Yom Tov. So that's our first factor. It is are we referring to a Yom Tov carbon ola or either ola or shlamim, or are we referring to a non-Yom Tov carbon, just a neder or a nedava, which could be brought any other time? Second thing, ola and shlamim themselves are different in that the shlamim is eaten, and therefore it's something which is relevant to Yom Tov in that sense, but the ola is not. So the Gemara says that Ula's explanation of the Mishnah is that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are only arguing about Yom Tov karbanos. If it is nedarmun and davis, neither of them would ever say you could bring any of these karbanos, not a shlamim and not an ola. You have no business bringing a carbon which is not a Yom Tov carbon on Yom Tov. That does not allow you to violate Halchas Yom Tov and Shecht. You should just leave it for after Yom Tov. What's the machlokes about? Machlokes is about the karbonos of Yom Tov. Now, shlamim, everybody says you're allowed to bring. The ola is a machlokes, and the reason is because the issue is, how do you understand the pasuk that says v'chag ha'isem v'yisay chag l'Hashem? Chag ha'isem, according to Beis Shammai, that chag refers to a chagiga, refers to a chagiga only. And Beis Hillel doesn't focus on the word la Hashem. You bring anything which is la Hashem, and therefore it includes the carbon ola. So anyway, so this is Ula's explanation. And Rav Ada bar Ava has a very similar, he has the same understanding. Now the Gemara has a Mishnah which has Rav Shimon ben Elazar explaining this machlokes, and it is different, it doesn't fit. According to this Mishnah, the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is about a point system. The machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is about a type of carbon that has one point towards being permitted on Yom Tov, which is either it's a carbon shlamim, so it's edible, or it is a Yom Tov carbon, so a carbon ola, which is not edible, but is the ola suriyah, which is meant to be brought on Yom Tov. That's what they're arguing about. Something which has 0 points, such as a carbon ola, which is not a Yom Tov carbon, that everybody agrees cannot be brought on Yom Tov. Something which has both points is a carbon shlamim, which is shalmei chagiga, that everybody agrees can be brought on Yom Tov. Now, according to this version, Beis Hillel would agree that a shlamim, which is nedarm nedavos, can be brought on Yom Tov because it does have 1 point, and Beis Hillel argues on Beis Shammai about anything with 1 point, and Beis Hillel says that it's mutter. So this, therefore, would go into the machlokes according to this Mishnah. Well, according to Ula's pshat, it would not go into the machlokes. That's the kasha on Ula. So how do you answer this kasha? In order to answer this, the Gemara first rereads the Mishnah. It focuses the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai not only on a carbon ola, which is not Yom Tov, but it says it's on a carbon shlamim and a carbon ola, which are not Yom Tov. And then the Mishnah reads the exact same as our Mishnah had been according to Ula. That's one approach. The Gemara's second approach is Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says you can't ask a kasha from one Tana on Ula. There's another Tana which defends Ula. And that Tana comes out the same way that Ula says it. The Gemara quotes a Beitzah, which says the machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai exactly the way Ula had explained it. That there is no machlokes about anything which is not a Yom Tov carbon that it certainly cannot be brought. Machlokes is about bringing a carbon ola. And carbon shlamim, everybody agrees you can bring if it is a Yom Tov carbon. All the machlokes is about a carbon ola, which is a Yom Tov carbon. Can you bring that or not? This version just adds one thing and says that Beis Shammai says that you have to do smicha before Yom Tov. When you are not allowed to do smicha on Yom Tov, you do the smicha before Yom Tov. And Beis Hillel says no, you can do the smicha on Yom Tov itself. But again, it was defended because we have a Beitzah which explains Machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai the way he does. So what we have established, therefore, is that we have a Machlokas Tanaim whether or not you are allowed to bring a karbanos, nidarim, and nidavos on Yom Tov. The Gemara now wants to show that this is at the root of another Machlokas in another Beitzah. The Gemara brings a Beitzah which has three opinions. The opinions are somewhat unclear. The Gemara wants to show that at least two of them are disputing the issue of you're allowed to bring karbanos on Yom Tov that are nidarim or nidavos. Let's read the three opinions, and the Gemara will then proceed to explain them one by one and show that this is the root of the Machlokas. So the opinions are as follows. The first thing that the Beitzah brings is a Tanakama, and it's discussing the carbon toida. Carbon toida is a carbon which is brought as a thank you to Hashem. It is something which can be brought at any time, and therefore it counts as a neder or as a nedava. It's not restricted to a certain time. And it includes loaves of bread, 30 matzahs and 10 chalos, and includes chametz. So the first opinion says you can't bring it on Pesach because it's got chametz in it. You can't bring it on Shavuos because Shavuos is Yom Tov. You can't bring a carbon on Yom Tov. But you could bring it on a Sukkos. That's the first opinion. The Gemara, which we'll see further, we'll bring it up here. The Gemara explains what's the chiddush that you're allowed to bring it, that you can't bring it on Pesach. Obviously, it's chametz. You can't bring up Pesach. The Gemara says it's talking about Erev Pesach, where you're allowed to eat chametz, but its eating time will be limited. You will not get the full time period that you usually have to eat a carbon toda. It will be limited by the Isra Chilas chametz, and that you're not allowed to do. That's the chiddush. Shavuos you can't bring because this opinion holds you're not allowed to bring optional. You're not allowed to bring in the davos on Yom Tov. That's like one of the opinions we saw in the previous Beitzah. Why are you allowed to bring it on Sukkot? That's like Chalamoid. You're allowed to bring the carbon on Chalamoid. So this opinion therefore holds you cannot bring the Dharm and the Davos on Yom Tov. Okay, now the next opinion in this Mishnah is Reb Shimon. It is Beitzah, is Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says as follows: the Torah says b'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashuos, b'chag hasukos, puts them all together, and it's discussing karbanos, and therefore you're only allowed to bring any carbon on any of them that you can bring on all three of them. Anything which you can't bring on Pesach, you can't bring on Shavuos, you can't bring on Sukkos. So the Gemara says, how do you explain this opinion? The only thing that he's saying that's different than the previous opinion is that he's saying that you can bring on Sukkos. In the previous opinion, it said you can't bring Sukkos. Was talking about Chalamoid. So this opinion means to say that you can't bring even a Chalamoid, meaning that Tanakama had said you could bring Sukkos Chalamoid. So he's saying you cannot bring a Chalamoid. How could that be? How could you not be able to bring a carbon of Chalamoid? Chalamoid, you're allowed to chop down trees to make a fire to cook meat. So Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean you can't bring it on Chalamoid. What he means to say is as follows: you don't have to bring it on Sukkos. You don't have to bring it on Sukkos because we may think you do. And that's because of the rule that you cannot delay a carbon which you promised to bring as a neder or as a nedav. You cannot delay it more than 3 yamim tovim. And we have a machlokes when we say that it has to be 3 yamim tovim, it has to be brought within 3 yamim tovim, 3 regalim. What does that mean? Any 3 or 3 in the order of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. The difference would be, let's say you promised to bring a carbon neder or nedava between Shavuos and Sukkos. So if it's any 3 Yomim Tovim, so you have Sukkos, Pesach, you got to bring it before Shavuos is over. If, however, it's 3 in order, so then your count doesn't start until next Pesach, and therefore you have Pesach, Shavuos, and next Sukkos. You don't have to bring it this Sukkos. Now, according to the first opinion, you better bring it on Sukkos now, because you're going to Yerushalayim for Sukkos anyway. You're not going to be able to bring it on Pesach because it's Chametz. You're not going to bring it on Shavuos because it's Yantif. So you got to bring it this Sukkos. According to the other opinion, though, you have until next Sukkos. You don't have to bring it now. And that's what Rosh Shimon is saying. You don't have to bring it now. You have until next Sukkos because it's got to be 3 in order. Okay, now the third opinion in the Mishnah is as follows. This is Reb Elazar, Reb Shimon. And he says as follows: a person is allowed to bring a carbon toida on Sukkos, and he's allowed to do it. It fulfills his chiyuv to bring a regular carbon on Yom Tov. There's a chiyuv to bring a carbon on Yom Tov, besides the carbon chagiga, that we should have meat, that we should have simcha, we should be able to eat b'simcha. So this fulfills that, because you're going to have meat, you'll be able to eat the meat, you'll have simcha from it. It does not, however, fulfill the obligation of chagiga, because the obligation of chagiga has to be something which was not already promised as a carbon for something else. It has to come from chulin. Now, the Gemara says, this opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Rav Shimon is clearly saying that you are allowed to bring a carbon on Sukkos. What's he talking about? He's talking about Chol Hamoed. It's the same as the previous opinion. He must therefore be saying that you're allowed to bring one on Yom Tov. Now, why does he say Sukkos? He could be referring to any Yom Tov. Why does he have to say Sukkos specifically? And the reason is because he holds that you violate the Isser of delaying a carbon as soon as Sukkos passes by. It doesn't matter about the 3 Yom Tovim. As soon as you get to a Sukkos, you violate the Isser. And therefore you got to make sure to do it before Sukkot, and that is his point. Make sure you do it on Sukkot. But this opinion clearly holds you are allowed to bring a carbon on Yom Tov, even if it's not Chol Hamoed, and that argues on the first opinion, the Tana Kamod, that you cannot. And there we have a machlokes which is similar to our previous brisa. Okay, now going further here, the Gemara wants to know, why do you have to tell me that he's Beitzah as a Shalmi Simcha, but not as a carbon Chagiga? For sure, it can't be Chagiga. We know that any carbon has to be brought from Chul and can't be brought from something that is already Kajim. So Gemara says, you may have thought that he can if when he was originally Makdish it to be his carbon Taida, he said, I want this to be my carbon Taida, and only becoming Kedusha, it's only getting Kedusha on the condition I could bring it as a Chagiga as well. And you may think that that works because you're giving it both Kedushas at the same time. And the Chiddush therefore here is that does not work. You have to bring a carbon Chagiga from something which was not promised to be any other carbon. You cannot double up 2 karbanos in one animal. This is similar to a question that was asked by Rav Shimon ben Lakish of Rav Yochanan. If somebody wants to make one animal into a Taida and a Chagiga at the same time, or if somebody is a Nazir and he wants to use Meiser Sheni money to purchase karbanos to get out of his Naziris, his ending Naziris karbanos, it does not work. He does become a Nazir, but it does not work, and he has to bring separate karbanos that he cannot buy with Meiser Sheni money, and he has to bring a separate karban Taida and a separate karban Chagiga.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.